Hi everyone, it's Kristen. Welcome back to video 2 of our beginner quilting series. So in our first video, I covered how to make the quilt top. We used a really simple pattern available for free from Fat Quarter Shop. You can check out the video. I'll put it up in the cards and I'll link it in the description box down below. This will be a separate playlist, so you'll be able to access this as needed. So now that we have the quilt top finished, it's time to move on to basting. And basting is basically where we are making the quilt sandwich. So you're taking your backing fabric and then you're putting your batting fabric and then the quilt top on top of it, and we're sandwiching those things together, and that is called basting, where basically we're attaching those pieces together. And so that is in preparation for doing the actual quilting portion, which is where you would put a design on your quilt or straight lines or whatever it is. It's the part where it kind of just pieces everything together, so it's all held together as one unit. So since this is a beginner quilting tutorial, I'm going to keep this as simple as I possibly can, and we are going to be quilting just some straight lines across this quilt. I think it's going to look really lovely with this pattern. So we're going to be doing diagonal lines across the quilt, and I'm going to walk you through the steps on how to mark the quilt, and then we're going to go over to our sewing machine and I'm going to share with you how to use your just average at-home sewing machine to go ahead and put the quilting on your quilt. And then in the next video, we're going to talk all about binding, which is where we add that little edge to the perimeter of the quilt, which finishes everything off really nicely. All right, let's get started basting the quilt. Now there are a couple of different ways to baste a quilt. My personal favorite is to use safety pins to baste the quilt. I think it's the simplest method. There is another way to do it by using a basically adhesive spray. So you would spray it down and adhere everything together in that way. But I don't love the idea of that personally, just because I've heard people talk about how you need ventilation in the room when you spray it and things like that, and that just doesn't make me feel great, especially when I'm making like baby quilts or any blanket that someone's gonna be like, you know, using. Maybe it comes out when you wash it, I guess, but I am just like a chemical-free person and I just have no interest in getting involved in that. So I use safety pins because they don't involve any spraying of the chemicals in the air. So you'll want to cut your backing fabric and your batting to about 5 inches wider than your quilt top all the way around. So the way that I do that is I just lay my backing fabric on the floor and then I put my quilt top on top of it, and then it does not have to be perfect. I just use scissors or like pinking shears, something like that, and just cut roughly 5 inches around the whole quilt top. And I do the exact same thing for my batting. I just lay the batting on the ground, put the quilt top on top, and then cut all the way around it. Because the quilt that we are doing is a baby-sized quilt, we are not having to piece our backing together, but if you are making a larger quilt, then you would need to take like 2 pieces of backing fabric and sew it together and then use that as your backing. Hopefully that makes sense. But we're starting with a small quilt just to keep things nice and simple for you guys. So about 5 inches on all sides is what you need for the backing and the batting. So you want that hanging off the edge of your quilt top, just like that. My favorite batting to use for quilts is Warm and Natural or Warm and White. This is a 100% cotton batting. They sell it at places like Hobby Lobby and Joann's. You can find it on Amazon. So it's super easy to find and it's my favorite batting to use for quilts. All right, so my favorite way to start the basting process is to just put my backing fabric on the floor somewhere. Like a hardwood floor is great. If you have a table big enough, then that is awesome as well. I don't really have a table that will fit this, so I just use my floor. And I like to use painter's tape. I have already ironed this a bit just to get it you know, it's not perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect, but it was a bit wrinkly. It was near the end of the bolt, so it was a little bit wrinkly. But I'm just going to the corners and any of the spots where I feel like would be good to have it taped down. We're just trying to get this pulled nice and taut, so that way when we start putting our quilt sandwich together, everything, you know, it won't be wrinkly and that sort of a thing. If you're using a backing fabric that is printed, then you will want the printed side down. So the printed side facing the floor is what you want. This is just obviously plain fabric, so it doesn't really have a wrong side, so it doesn't matter. Okay, the next part of our quilt sandwich is our batting. So I'm just gonna lay the batting on top of my backing fabric and smooth out all the wrinkles. The good thing about this batting is that it kind of has like a sticky kind of texture, so it kind of sticks to the backing fabric. So that kind of makes this process a bit easier. Next step is our quilt top. So I'm just gonna lay my quilt top out. Again, we want there to be overage on all sides. So smooth all the wrinkles out. Get rid of any strings, things like that. All right. So I'm using these basting safety pins here, and I'm just gonna go through making sure everything is nice and smooth and start pinning my quilt all over. So I just like to kind of drop the safety pins around where I think it should be basted. And I'm gonna start on this side and just work my way down. So you do just want to make sure that you get through all 3 layers when you're doing this. But otherwise, it's really quite simple. You're just poking it in. You'll be able to feel if you get through all the layers. You can kind of feel the pin going through all of them. Just like that, I'm gonna do this very same thing all the way across the whole quilt. All right, we have our quilt basted. All the safety pins are in place. So it's time to go ahead and mark our diagonal lines, or however you want to do your quilting lines. I love the look of diagonal lines across a square quilt. So that's what I'm going to be doing today. That's what I'm going to be sharing with you guys today. So I'm gonna use my big Creative Grids ruler. This one is 24 inches, and it's gonna help me to get my straight lines. I also like to use a water-soluble pin, so this will come out in the wash and I don't have to worry about it marking up my beautiful quilt that I just worked so hard on. So one difficult thing about using safety pins to baste is that when you go to start marking your quilt for your quilting lines, they can sometimes get in the way. So what I'm gonna do is just do the best I can. And then if they start getting in the way, I'm just gonna move some of them over. So like there's one right here. I think I'm gonna move this one just to get it out of the way. And it doesn't hurt anything to do that. So basically what I'm gonna be doing is lining up, let me make sure you can see, okay. Lining up my ruler here and just trying to make sure that I get a nice diagonal line going all the way across my quilt. Okay, and then I'm going to use my water-soluble pen just to very gently mark my line. And because my ruler is not long enough, I have to shift my quilt, paying close attention to where it's where my line's running. I'm going to move this pin. Okay. And this one, I have a few in the way for this one. All right, let's continue our line down. And if we just about hit the corner, then I'll know we did it right. Looks pretty good to me. All right, and now we're gonna do our next line. So once we get our initial center line done, it makes the rest of them so much easier because we can just line up our ruler with the line that we've marked. So I'm making all of my diagonal lines 3 inches apart. So I have my ruler with the 3 right over the blue line I already made, and then I just mark. And we move down. And we do it again. Sometimes the safety pins will lay pretty well where I don't have to pull them up, but, and looks like and like that. And we'll do it again. There are so many different ways to finish a quilt. You can do free motion quilting, which is where you use your machine at home and you quilt designs on it. Just free motion, just doing it yourself. I've tried a little bit and I just don't love it yet. I'm still working on getting better at that method. So right now, my favorite way is to just do some either stitch in the ditch, they call it, which depending on the design, you just kind of stitch just to the side of your main seams across, which can be a really great way to do it. But as I mentioned in the beginning, I've been loving the look of these diagonal lines across the quilt, especially when it's kind of like a square quilt. I don't know why, it just really looks pretty to me. So that's why I'm sharing it with you today. Another thing that you could do would be to do diagonal lines one way, like we're doing it, and then diagonal lines the other way, so it creates like little diamonds throughout the quilt. That would be a super pretty way to finish the quilt as well. But again, this one is made for beginners, so I'm trying to keep it as simple as I can for you. All right, let's rotate our quilt and get the other half marked. We are so close to being able to go over and start quilting. It's so exciting to get to the point where you actually get to sit at your machine and do the quilting portion. It really just starts coming together and looking like a real quilt, which is so exciting. I am excited to share all of that with you. So I'm just gonna finish getting these lines drawn all the way down 3 inches apart. And then after we're done with that, I will meet you over at the sewing machine. We'll talk about what you need over there and thread and all that good stuff so we can get this quilt quilted. So for quilting with thick batting and for doing the lines and stuff like we are doing, we want to use a walking foot. 100% cotton thread in your bobbin and in your top stitch, and make sure you have a fresh bobbin full of thread before you get started. It's also helpful if you change out your needle just to make sure that you have a nice sharp needle as you begin your project. All right, let's go ahead and get our quilt on the machine. I like to kind of roll the edges up a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to manage. And I am going to start on my very center line, and I have my needle just centered right in the middle, and all I'm going to do is just follow my blue line all the way down. So I have all my stitches and everything set up just right. And again, I like to kind of roll my quilt up a little bit so it'll fit through the throat of my machine, because it's not a very long, doesn't have a long throat, so it can be a little tricky getting it through here, but here we go. So I have it set up. I'm going to put my needle down and see if we can get you zoomed in here, and we're just going to start stitching. You can take it as slow as you need to. Just hitting that blue line, kind of helping feed your fabric through nice and gently. If you have any safety pins in the way of your line, you're going to want to move them out of the way. You do not want to sew over your safety pins or any pins of any kind. I'm just adjusting as I go, making sure everything is lined up and not getting all like wrinkled, and that we're not getting off track for our line. Beautiful. I am gonna actually grab my quilting gloves. This is not totally necessary for this type of quilting, but these have little grips on them that help you like hang on to the fabric while you're feeding it through. It's especially helpful when you're free motion quilting, but it helps with this as well. I noticed my fingers slipping when I was trying to push the fabric through, so that's what made me think of it. So this just helps you grip it and push it right through. My sewing machine is sliding. I've never had that happen before. All right. All right, we made it all the way to the end. I'm gonna pull my needle up and slide my project off. I'm gonna cut my thread, and then it's time to move to the next line over. So we're gonna just keep repeating this same process. I have a pin right in the way, right off the bat. So I'm gonna remove it. I'm gonna actually go down the line and just go ahead and remove any safety pins that are in my way. And I'm going to try to move them to a spot where they will not be in my way for the future lines. And I'm just going to do the exact same thing that I just did all the way down. I'm going to do that for all of our lines in the quilt. All right, we finished quilting the quilt. It turned out so beautiful. I just love the diagonal lines. Again, I mentioned before that if you wanted more quilting on the top, You could also do diagonal lines going the other way and create little diamond shapes throughout. That would be beautiful as well. In our next video, I'm going to be covering, we're going to be trimming up our quilts. We're going to be getting rid of all of this excess, and then we're going to be adding our binding to the edges, which is the very last step in making the quilt. So I hope that you have been enjoying this quilting series so far. I'm excited to share with you the third video in our series, which will be coming out next week. So be on the lookout for that. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.